Scientia potentia est. Knowledge is power. It is said that at the time of the creation of the human being, the gods had exiled humanity to planet Earth, denying them both the wealth of knowledge and fire. These beings had been created in secret and without Zeus's permission by the Titan Prometheus, who had shaped them from clay and protected them from the injustices of the gods. For this reason, Zeus, father of all the gods, angry at the disrespectful behavior towards celestial beings, had relegated that same humanity to a blue-green planet dispersed in the universe. And this is how human beings died of hardship, without hope and without the power of fire. Prometheus, who deeply loved his creation, the human people, then went to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and the arts, who secretly let him enter Olympus. There, in the darkness of night, Prometheus lit a torch from Apollo's chariot, and without anyone seeing him, he fled, taking with him that immense power that had been denied to men. The human race welcomed Prometheus's gift and was able to save itself from death using the sacred fire of Olympus. But for the Titan, the price to pay was very high. In fact, Zeus, as soon as he learned of Prometheus's betrayal, had him captured and chained him onto one of the highest mountains that was most exposed to the elements. There, day by day, Prometheus was attacked by the eagle Aethon, who tore out his liver to eat it, and every day the liver was regenerated to be eaten again by the great flying monster. Prometheus stole fire to allow humans to survive and thrive. But the penalty for the sin of knowledge had a very high price. Yet knowledge has no boundaries and no limits. It is a vast expanse made of infinite, profound and superficial discoveries that human beings try to bring to light, like Prometheus's fire. The condemnation of knowledge, however, remains that of not being able to fully understand or accept what is revealed to everyone's eyes. Surely, among the humans to whom Prometheus brought fire, there were some who doubted the Titan's potential or the value of his gift. Knowledge divides. Knowledge breaks the hinges of certainties and mental foundations. The history of man is an unending unfolding of research, discoveries, experiments, yet something always continues to escape us, something that flies out of our hands when we try to grab it. Like Prometheus's fire, this knowledge burns if touched. It cannot be grasped completely, but it can be tamed. It can be observed and controlled so that it reveals its secrets to us. But what if the science of knowledge was not only for humans? What if the legend of Prometheus was telling us another story, a story of distant planets and civilizations, mysterious and invisible to our eyes, whose mere existence could not be accepted by most of us? A vast majority of the scientific methods that man uses on his own planet are a mystery to many, and most of the time they just seem absurd, ineffective, and unclear. We do not have the capacity to fully understand the methods that strive to achieve knowledge. All this cannot help but raise questions. Since man has become very aware of not being alone in the universe, of having boundless possibilities of life beyond his own planet, he has always tried to understand or imagine the methods and means of extraterrestrial peoples. Over the years, evidence has been found that our planet has been visited by alien entities from remote places in the universe, and it is precisely the presence of these alien species that raises questions. But to find those answers we so seek, the right questions sometimes must be asked by observing and analysing ourselves. What do we do when we explore remote places that we don't know? What do our expeditions to other planets consist of? What are we looking for on these planets? Every time man has made new discoveries, he has always analysed, taken samples to study, carried out experiments to understand the behaviour of certain events, dissected and decomposed living and non-living elements present on the planet. So, if this is man's method for knowing and discovering the truths of the world, why couldn't it be the same criterion for those who come from other planets to study ours? It is something familiar, known, that we can understand with simple and logical, almost justifying, reasoning. The history of man is littered with abductions, close encounters, anomalous events caused by foreign elements, wars hidden from everybody's eyes. It's as if the entire planet Earth was inside a glass case, inside a mysterious laboratory, and above it, extraterrestrial beings were observing us with a critical and scientific eye, to study us, to understand us, and verify the effects their experiments have on us. From this perspective, with these premises and these attempts to explain events as something controlled and methodical, one cannot help but explain most of the mysteries and facts that have occurred in human history and which involve all of us. We could be, without knowing it, the guinea pigs of sentient beings who have been carefully studying us for centuries to penetrate the mysteries of our planet, which is far more than we could do with our limited and obsolete methods. The Earth is a vast world to discover and contains within it infinite treasures and resources that perhaps not even we can understand. But the eye of those who observe us, of those who study us, has the ability to see what is obvious and invisible to us. A real study of planet Earth has begun and has been ongoing for decades, and many ufology scholars are trying to understand the modus operandi, the study method used by alien life forms to penetrate the secrets of our planet and its inhabitants. But if knowledge has a price to pay for us, we can imagine that it has one for them too. In order to substantiate a hypothesis, one needs a basis, a first event, a precedent from which to start and begin to develop various and disparate theories and observations. From there, where everything begins, the investigation begins. In an area of New Mexico, there is a United States Air Force base called Holloman. Most of the war aircraft models in production by the Air Force since the Second World War come from this base. Near this military base, there is an immense expanse of completely white sand that extends for kilometers. So much so that it took the name of White Sands. It is a breathtaking spectacle of nature, yet this apparently peaceful and naturalistic land has been the scene of several missile tests by military forces. The very first tests on the atomic bomb, one of the most powerful and disastrous inventions known to man that put an end to the Second World War, took place right here. This is the known history of White Sands. It would seem that there is nothing more to say about this place. An area once controlled by the military, now a national park. But there are other stories linked to White Sands. stories that contain secrets beyond man's imagination. In fact, it seems that among these white dunes, a large number of anomalous and inexplicable incidents have occurred, and continue to occur. Some wonder if the interest in this area simply regards enemy war forces, given the quantity of weapons tested on its soil. Yet others, however, believe that rival factions are not the only ones interested in unraveling the mysteries of White Sands. Is it possible, as many claim, that this expanse of sand could be of interest to other unknown forces coming from deep space? Some argue that this is not just a theory, but a real consideration supported by facts. In the 1950s, there was a lot of excitement about this type of topic, and everyone is aware of the mysteries linked to the Roswell case, and those surrounding the enigmatic Area 51. The newspapers and the media amply covered it. In fact, at the end of the 1940s, that singular incident occurred in the town of Roswell, involving the crash of an unidentified flying object. A UFO which was later recovered by military forces and kept hidden in a military base in Groom Lake, renamed Area 51. For this reason, the population now firmly believes that most of these incidents with unidentified flying objects are then hidden away to be studied by military forces, precisely in desert bases such as that of Holloman in New Mexico. Almost every day in the 1950s, various sightings of UFOs were reported near White Sands. So, if alien UFOs are hovering around that specific military base, it means that somebody might be interested in the technologies that are being developed and tested in that area. And it is also possible that those same technologies could derive from the reconstruction of extraterrestrial weapons and vehicles that the military has recovered and attempted to recreate, such as those of Roswell. Whatever the truth is, we cannot know. However, we do know that something strange happens at White Sands almost every day, and radars pick up unidentified aircraft speeding above the area. So much so that even the CIA is spotted wandering around the White Desert. One morning in March 1956, yet another missile launch was carried out on White Sands, and, according to practice, some selected soldiers were sent out on an expedition to the dunes to recover the remains of the missile and report the effects it had had. This is how, at 3 a.m., Major William Cunningham and Sergeant Jonathan Leavitt of the United States Air Force reached the designated location for the recovery of the remains of the missile. The two get out of their jeep and take out their flashlights to search the area. Despite it being the middle of the night, the white sand reflects the brilliant light of the moon, illuminating the entire area. Precisely because of the atmospheric conditions of the early morning, the task of the two soldiers is not something simple to complete. Great patience and a spirit of observation are needed to be able to navigate in the darkness of the night. But Cunningham and Leavitt were tasked with this mission precisely because of their uncommon skills of stoicism and observation. Several minutes pass in search of the remains of the missile when Sergeant Leavitt moves away from their position and heads towards an enormous white dune to then surpass it and emerge on the other side. Major Cunningham, who continues on his way, notices his colleague's behavior but does not object. Most likely, he just needs a few minutes for his biological needs. So, after crossing the dune, the Major loses sight of him. The light from Cunningham's torch continues to sweep the area in search of the missile, and the minutes continue to pass. So many, in fact, that the Major can no longer explain the Sergeant's absence. What had happened to Levet? Thanks to his skills, Cunningham retraces the route he had taken until he reaches the point where the two had separated. And, having reached the large dune that Levet had passed, the Major hears a scream. The endless desert for kilometers and kilometers shows no sign of life other than that of the two soldiers, and now a cry for help and terror echoes in the empty night. Cunningham rushes to the foot of the dune, thinking that Levet may have been bitten by a snake or attacked by some other desert beast. Arriving at the top of the sandy hill, Cunningham sees nothing. Then he shines his flashlight 30 feet away from him and finds himself in front of a disconcerting sight that even he can't believe. The calm night sky is broken by the presence of what appears to be a huge silver disc-shaped vehicle hovering at least 15 to 20 feet in the air. Major Cunningham knows all the aviation vehicles used by the American government, and, for security purposes, also those available to enemy nations. But he is unable to recognize that strange and immense disc as belonging to any of the war and civil aircraft available to terrestrial beings. The light of his torch begins to tremble on its own, but lowering it towards the base of the aircraft, he manages to illuminate a strange and enormous organic filament, like a monstrous silver snake, which descends perpendicular to the ground. At the end of this arm, as if engulfed in a predatory grip, is Sergeant Levet. The silver snake is wrapped around his legs and does not seem to give in the slightest to the struggles of its prey. Levet, in fact, is trying to free himself by kicking and scratching at that strange silver filament with his hands and feet. In panic and disbelief at what he is seeing, Major Cunningham thinks that the strange tube is causing profound injuries to his colleague, and notices that the more Levet fights for survival, the more that cable seems to retract, to return to the inside of the enormous flying saucer, dragging along with it Sergeant Levet, who is now in mid-air being sucked into the belly of that beast. Now, stop and think for a moment. You are faced with a similar scene. Your colleague is being kidnapped by a flying object that you have never seen, and that perhaps you would never have imagined seeing in the darkness and solitude of an endless desert. You are helpless and engulfed by terror, facing that terrifying event. What would you do? Most likely, most of you would do what Cunningham did, which is nothing. When fear and bewilderment strike, the brain can do little to react, and being able to figure out what the right thing is to do is not something you can contemplate. The slimy silver arm elevates the now helpless Levet until it enters a crack in the body of the strange aircraft. Cunningham hears a deep metallic click, the heavy click of a metal door closing, and sees the sergeant's body disappear inside. Then, with a slow and disturbing rumble, the disc takes off and disappears into the sky without leaving any trace. Shocked by this vision, Cunningham's brain reactivates in a desperate rush of survival and sense of duty, and he immediately thinks of getting back to the jeep. He launches himself towards it, but his body still hasn't recovered from the shock, and it takes him a few minutes and a few falls to reach the radio and call for reinforcements in a last-ditch, desperate attempt to save his colleague. The emergency services arrive at the site of the incident as dawn is just about to break, and they find Cunningham alone, dazed and confused, in a clear state of shock. the man is unable to tell them anything about the incident. He is barely able to string two words together. So the security team decides to take matters into their own hands and send the shocked Major to the base hospital, where he is confined and kept under close surveillance. What he tells them is not normal, nor something that the military can believe. But there is no trace of Sergeant Jonathan Lovett at the place where Cunningham was found. This is the official start of the investigations, and the facts begin to be reconstructed. From the radar data of the control tower of the Holloman base, the report of an unidentified aircraft near White Sands is confirmed on the exact day and time of the moment in which Lovett disappeared, according to Cunningham's reconstruction. The instruments, however, were unable to identify the aircraft as it was too fast to be correctly localized. While a team is sent to White Sands to inspect the area and look for evidence of the sergeant's disappearance, Major Cunningham is segregated and interrogated continuously for 3 unnerving days. The Major is still terrified, but his story is formidable, and he manages to reconstruct that entire absurd incident, which is both incredible and supernatural. But on the 3rd day of interrogation, something happens that could cast serious doubt on Cunningham's entire story, or it could confirm it. In fact, in White Sands, about 10 miles from the place where the Major witnessed the kidnapping, Lovett's body is found. His body is completely naked, and although specialists agree that it had been exposed to the harsh desert elements for at least 2 days, it shows no particular signs of decomposition or degradation. On the contrary, it seems perfectly preserved and protected, except for some rather disturbing details. The sergeant's remains, in fact, have been seriously mutilated. His eyes have been gouged out from his face, his tongue has been almost completely cut off, and a large part of his jawbone has been removed. The rest of his body appears to be an empty shell, missing many parts. Some of his internal organs have been removed, and his anus and genitals appear to have been pulled out as if they were corks. Of all of these macabre details, what amazes experts is the mythology of this mutilation. In fact, it would seem that whoever carried out this bizarre operation made use of excellent surgical skills. Yet this is not the thing that most amazes those who found Lovett. There is something even stranger and more mysterious that they notice about his corpse. Although there are clear signs of surgical operations and tampering with the body, there are no traces of blood around them, nor does there appear to be any blood inside the corpse. He has been completely drained of blood without, however, presenting any vascular collapse, due usually to death from bleeding. It is as if the body has been completely drained of blood. But why? The dynamics of the discovery have something else incredible about them. Near the site where Lovett was found, many necrophagous predatory birds were found dead from intoxication, probably from having attempted to feed on the corpse. And the surgery, whoever performed the autopsy on Lovett's body speaks without any doubt that surgical interventions were performed on the corpse. But what is the motive for such barbarity? It is clear to everyone that the body was dissected, as if it had been the subject of study by unknown beings. Yet the clear evidence on Lovett's body is not enough to shed light on the mystery of his disappearance. For this reason, the court-martial triggers the immediate arrest of Major William Cunningham, the only witness to Sergeant Jonathan Levette's disappearance, accusing him of the murder of his colleague. The story that the Major tells to the martial court is so absurd that the Commission accuses him of having invented it in order to be able to exonerate himself for the terrible mutilation of Levette's corpse. However, the court rejects these accusations as baseless and completely lacking in evidence. Thus, Major Cunningham is exonerated. How was it possible that a single man, alone in an endless desert in the middle of the night, could do something like this? And if he wasn't responsible, then who was? Cunningham's story is too incredible to ignore, and it is therefore decided to open a special project to continue the investigation. Thus, Project Grudge was born, the predecessor of the more famous Project Blue Book. It appears that in the Project Grudge files there was a section of more than 600 pages regarding the Levette-Cunningham case entitled Project Grudge No. 13. However, if you analyse the declassified files that remain from this project, nothing exists between files number 12 and number 14, and the government of the United States of America even denies the existence of this report. This is why it was only years later that we managed to reconstruct the data contained inside the files, but only thanks to a lucky few who managed to read them. Now, everything we know, we owe to the second-hand memory of some experts. One of these is William Cooper, a radio host and conspiracy theorist who claims to have been assigned to study the Project Grudge documents in the 1970s. Then there is a former Green Beret captain who records 2 audio cassettes reporting what he can remember of the contents of Report Number 13 during a security service at Chicksands, a former RAF base. If compared, the stories of the only 2 people who were able to read the files have points in common that could actually reconstruct the entire document. It is thanks to their testimonies that we have been able to reconstruct the facts of the case which occurred in March 1956 at White Sands. Because although the Project Grudge files have been declassified and are clearly available on the internet, there is no reference to Report Number 13, neither in previous reports nor in subsequent ones, and the Levette-Cunningham case would simply have remained unfounded due to the lack of evidence. When theorizing, once the first incident, the precedent, has been established, we must proceed by researching and observing similar events that develop over time following the first sighting. And this is how one can move forward with one's theories. It might seem that the Levette-Cunningham case is an isolated event, unexplained and shrouded in a cloud of silence and denial. And so it was, for many years. But for the years following the events of White Sands, that case only created a precedent. A body is found under mysterious circumstances. That body disappeared for more than 24 hours and was then found kilometers away from the last sighting. It then turns out that this body has been mutilated, deprived of organs and blood, with extreme precision and surgical skill, all in unclear and inexplicable dynamics. As we analyze and try to understand these facts, we move in time and space from New Mexico in the mid-1950s to Brazil in the late 1970s. A phone call arrives in the offices of the Air Force. On the line is the mayor of Colares, a small seaside town. The mayor asks for help from the Brazilian Air Force following the strange events that are causing panic among the population of Colares. For a few days, in fact, several local residents have been reporting testimonies of sightings of lights of different colors and shapes in the sky. Nothing strange, it will probably be due to some mass hallucination. Unfortunately, however, the story is not limited to simple visions, but also to real attacks on human beings, who are irradiated by rays of light, which cause wounds, injuries and burns on the bodies of those attacked. Then there are the subjects who complain of strange sensations, such as weakness, fainting, as if someone had drawn some blood from them. Apparently, in the town, these flying lights that project rays and steal blood from people's bodies have been renamed chupa, or suckers. Desperate and without knowing what to do anymore, the citizens of Colares organize night vigils, in which they light fires and set off fireworks with the hope that they can keep the strange lights in the sky away. Urban legends, mass hysteria. The Brazilian military cannot know this, but if an authoritative figure, such as the mayor of a town in their state, requests help, they have no choice but to intervene. An investigation named Operação Prato was thus prepared. In Portuguese, prato means saucer, like the discoidal shapes of lights in the sky. Operation Saucer, like the shapes of UFOs. The presence of the armed forces in the town reassures the majority of residents, and during the entire period of the operation, the military manages to take several photographs depicting these strange lights in the sky. But of everything else, the rays fired at citizens and the blood samples, the military found nothing. Thus, in December 1977, after 4 months, Operation Saucer was closed without having gathered any evidence of those unusual phenomena. However, several subsequent studies have proven various signs of anemia, a below-average amount of hemoglobin, in many subjects. But it has not been possible to prove that this blood was removed by the UFOs. However, it would seem that some citizens of Colares died due to the rays of light fired at them by the flying objects, as the corpses examined had suffered injuries compatible with the effects of microwave radiation. All very strange, especially when, 20 years after Operation Saucer, the ex-captain Urange, who had command of the operation, who was by then retired, gives an interview to some ufologists, where he talks about the details of the operations conducted in Colares in those months of 1977. 3 months after that interview, the ex-captain was found dead in his home. He had hanged himself with the belt of his bathrobe. It would seem like a suicide. But his desire to shed light on Operation Saucer seems to have some meaning in his death. Someone may have wanted him to remain silent. A silence about something that is better not to know, that someone would like to hide. Some alien being, according to some testimonies, would have carried out experiments, biological and social analyses on the citizens of the small and charming town of Colares. It's as if the residents had been turned into guinea pigs and their entire town was transformed into a research laboratory to study the behavior of human beings. Our blood, which contains much of the genetic information of a human body, appears to be the main target of aliens targeting Earth. In the light of this theory, there are 2 other important stories that could validate what many think happened in Colares. Panorama is a municipality in the state of São Paulo, also in Brazil, where around 1981 something was happening that directly recalled the Colares events. Many citizens, in fact, had seen the already famous chupas in the sky. But the descriptions of these flying objects are varied among witnesses. Some describe them as elongated discs, others as enormous rectangles, similar to home refrigerators, but all say they have seen these chupas shooting their luminous rays over the fields as if to map the areas, and then fly away. Even the young Abel Boro and Rivamar Ferreira see a flying saucer, one of those in the shape of a disc, in fact with a structure that rotates on itself and its own light so blinding that it is difficult to distinguish its contours. This UFO is flying above the heads of the two boys on an October evening. The two boys run away terrified. They too have heard of the chupas and know very well that they are flying entities hostile to man. In fact, suddenly the flying spacecraft begins to shoot out a ray of very hot light at them, producing such a force of attraction that it prevents them from escaping. Rivamar, slightly ahead of his friend, manages to resist with all his strength and free himself from the magnetic force of the ray, escaping it. Poor Abel, however, remains at the center of the beam, and despite doing everything he can to fight against it, he is unable to escape. When Rivamar looks back one last time during his escape into the woods, he sees his friend blocked by the beam of light that sucks him inside the aircraft. Desperate and without knowing how to resolve the situation, Rivamar raises the alarm at the home where Abel and his family live. The two are just young boys who could have been playing a bad joke on their families. Maybe they heard about sightings in the area and took the opportunity to perform one of their stunts. But the prank of two young boys could not possibly last more than 24 hours, and when none of the Boro family sees little Abel return in the following days, they decide to ask the police for help. The search for Abel begins in the Panorama area, and, unfortunately, the boy is found. Helpless in the forest clearing where Rivamar had left him lies the body of Abel Boro, completely bled to death and without any sign of vascular collapse. Another Levette, on the other side of the world and in a different era. Once again, the same mysterious circumstances. A flying object that attracts its victim, swallows it up, and then brings its corpse back home to its original planet. For much of the 1970s and throughout the 1980s, Brazil and São Paulo in particular were the scene of events like this, which were extremely connected to each other by common denominators: sightings, kidnappings, and the discovery of corpses. The country is so shaken by these events that journalists and ufology scholars from all over the world make Brazil their obligatory destination to try to bring to light the mystery surrounding the abductions that are so frequent in that nation. Magazines, articles, radio broadcasts, books, and newspapers constantly investigate, interview, and try to connect the dots of what has been happening in that land for more than a decade. Some manage to connect those dots and see that these stories all have something in common, and that we cannot just look the other way by pretending that there aren't spatial entities responsible for these operations. But there is a story that takes place about 8 years after the Panorama incident which really has some macabre and incredible details. An event that stands out from the others in many details, but which is also connected thanks to many of its dynamics. The Billings Reservoir is the largest water reserve in São Paulo, Brazil. Inside it and underground, there is one of the largest hydroelectric power plants. One day, a boy from the area goes to the reservoir to spend a day outdoors and finds, to his horror, the remains of a terribly mutilated person. The authorities who examined the corpse found that the techniques used for the mutilation were extremely precise and advanced, and it would also appear that the worms and carrion that populate the area surrounding the reservoir refused to touch the corpse. But why? A case exactly like the Levette case, but investigators don't know it yet. The anus, the jawbone, and the eyes were removed with precision and care that was nothing short of obsessive. This time, however, the left ear and lips are also missing, making the face a mask of cuts. Perfectly symmetrical holes, exactly 2 inches in diameter, were made on the victim's back. It seems that a large part of the internal organs, muscles, and various tissues were removed through these holes. Precisely for this reason, the victim's chest collapsed on itself and is now like an empty bag. All wounds are cauterized, as if incandescent objects were used to seal them. Once again, in the coroner's report, there are no signs of resistance to an attack, nor of a struggle. The body was cleaned with such attention and care that it left all the Brazilian authorities stunned and shocked, and they decided, in fact, not to hide the news of the discovery, nor the details of the state of the body. They do not want this atrocity to end up forgotten, and, indeed, by publicly releasing this information, they are directly asking for help from other authorities from around the world. These 3 Brazilian cases have remained mysteries for a long time, and we can only scratch their surface. But the Lavette Cunningham case continues to bring new life to the investigations. Along the journey of investigations into these strange and bizarre incidents, the attentive observing scientist may come across interconnected events which do not appear to have any initial correlation, but which, with careful analysis and observation, can lead to astonishing and unexpected results. On June 24, 1947, Kenneth Arnold is flying his Cool Air A2 near Mount Rainier in Washington state. Arnold had just learned of a $5,000 reward for anyone who finds the remains of a US Marine Corps C-46 that had crashed near Mineral a few days earlier. Finding nothing, Arnold decides to abandon his fruitless search and head towards Yakima. Suddenly, a strong reflection of light, like a mirror refracting the sun, dazzles Arnold, who cannot even clearly identify the direction of origin of that strange light. After a few seconds, the flashes increase more and more, and the blinding light radiation is followed by the clear sighting of 9 unidentified flying objects with flashing lights, flying irregularly at an incredible speed. One of them appears to be sickle-shaped, while the other 8 have clear disc shapes. Dazed by that vision, the pilot can do nothing but land in Yakima and report to the Civil Aeronautics Administration, where everything is documented in a schematic and precise manner. Everything he described to the authorities is also what he later told the press. In fact, during his journey home, Kenneth Arnold stops at a gas station in Pendleton and, seized by the irrepressible desire to tell everything to the first person he sees, he begins to tell some of the station's customers about the sighting. Among the various onlookers who press him with questions to get more and more details on that curious story, there are also some journalists who write everything down and report the news in the next day's papers. In Arnold's story, the precise terms he used stand out. He described those flying objects as pie plates and their motion like a saucer if you skip it across water. Thus, the definition flying saucer was born, thanks to the witness account of an Idaho pilot. Given the wide national interest in his story, the term instantly became part of modern-day culture. Many years later, in 1979, curiosity and interest in extraterrestrial life forms intensified, and the investigations also, and above all, expanded into more significant cases of simple sightings. It is precisely in this period that a shocking discovery occurs. In the southwestern area of Idaho, to be precise in a forest between Bliss and Jerome, 2 hunters are exploring the area in search of their prey. One of the 2 suddenly spots what appears to be the carcass of an animal already killed and skinned by some beast. The 2 get closer to take a more precise look, but what they find in front of them is not a dead animal nor an old carcass, but the horrific remains of a mutilated man. The more they observe that corpse, the more the 2 hunters notice its disturbing details. His sexual organs have been carefully removed, and even the lips seem to be missing from what remains of his face. The body is totally naked. His clothes and belongings are found only later, a few tens of thousands of meters from the abandoned body. Overcome by despair, the two hunters call the local authorities, who then rush to the scene. Both the dynamics of the death of the mysterious man and the dynamics of the concealment of his corpse are investigated. It turns out that the victim was a nomad, a homeless person who regularly moved through the woods and nature, perhaps in search of adventure. From a subsequent analysis, traces of alcohol were found in the body, so it could be that he was in a state of intoxication at the exact moment of his death. Could it be that he had fallen victim to his addiction, an accident while intoxicated? If so, why was the victim completely stripped of his clothes, which were found intact a few kilometers away? A possible attempt at a theft that had gone wrong? It would seem not, since the man's belongings were intact and nothing appeared to be missing. And what about that macabre ritual of mutilation? Although investigators try, they cannot understand how it was possible for any animal to prey on those specific parts of the body with almost surgical precision. All hypotheses that lead to details linked to this planet seem to be discarded. But it is difficult to try to understand or even evaluate the options of an abduction followed by mutilation for various experiments. This is why in most of the reports that the police release following these findings, they are labeled as simple events caused by carcass-eating animals, even though the details of the dynamics involved would contradict these statements. Almost always in these reports, there is a total lack of understanding of how these surgical operations could have been perpetrated by simple wild animals. Nowadays, in the light of all these findings, we could even reconnect them all and try to find a meaning. If they were connected to each other, these cases would form a large spiral that becomes smaller and smaller as it tightens, until reaching a single solution at its center. The investigations into this bizarre discovery continue and are forced to extend decades later, when, in 1989, other bodies are found. But, this time, not human bodies. After a rainy night, 2 dead and mutilated cows are found in the meanders of an Idaho forest. Despite being livestock belonging to 2 different farms, the animals show the same signs of amputations and, it would appear, were performed in the same period of time. Many body parts were surgically removed, including the sexual organs, and blood had been completely drained from the bodies. Although it had rained heavily the previous night, no traces of human life forms or any predators were found around the remains of the 2 animals. The bodies showed no traces of having been attacked by predators, and there were no bullet holes, but further analysis revealed the presence of small holes on the right sides of the animals. This is the detail that makes investigators suspect that a poisonous substance with an immediate death effect may have been injected into the poor beasts. The cuts that allowed the removal of the organs appear to have been made with very sharp and precise instruments, and the hands that made them must have belonged to someone or something with great skills and experience, so much so that they cannot even be compared with most skilled butchers and skinners in the area. But what finally sheds a glimmer of light on these individual, isolated cases is a connection that makes the investigations reopen and move forward to come to a conclusion. In fact, it seems that when questioned, the farmers confess that in reality it is not the first time that cows have disappeared from their farms, only to be found dead and mutilated a few kilometers away. Maybe some animal, they thought, before all the details of the dynamics took shape and painted a broader and more disturbing picture. So, somebody enjoys carrying out disturbing abuses against farmers, perhaps for reasons of revenge, or is there something else behind it? A precise pattern that leads to a purpose that we cannot yet understand? Finally, after this first incident, the infinite investigation begins, which will continue up to the present day, which also involves other species inhabiting this planet in addition to ours. After having observed and re-observed the same event at different times and places, investigations very often get bogged down and cannot find a way out of the spiral into which they have fallen. Searching and researching in the same precise point, there is the risk of struggling to move forward, of colliding with the same dynamics without finding any answers, going around in circles in a single artificial motion. And it is here that man must interrupt his reasoning to try to explain events that he does not fully understand. It is precisely when data accumulate and intertwine that something is needed to reveal the solution, something that can suddenly undermine the conclusions or that can confirm them with further theses. Many of the cases we have analyzed so far had human bodies mutilated with surgical precision as their protagonists, men whose stories we will never fully know. But planet Earth is rich and prosperous with inhabitants who are not part of the human species. We share our planet with millions of other different and varied species. Anyone or anything from outside could not fully understand the mysteries of this planet if it focused solely on human beings. A logical discourse aimed at studying in depth the behavior of living beings on planet Earth would dictate that any form of sentient life outside our solar system must sooner or later also begin to study the fauna and flora of our planet. Unfortunately, for various life forms, in fact, this seems to be exactly the case. Because if cases involving human beings immediately receive significant media coverage, we must not take for granted that there cannot be cases very similar to those illustrated so far, also involving large numbers of animals. Indeed, it appears that many incidents of mass animal mutilation, similar to the human Levette case, have been reported over the centuries and reached their peak in the mid-1970s. Between April and October 1975, and in the state of Colorado alone, nearly 200 cases of livestock mutilation were reported. The farmers are shocked. The cows are horribly mutilated, their eyes gouged out, their ears and tongues removed, their genitals and udders are missing, along with an enormous quantity of blood, of which there is no trace in the immediate vicinity. No footprints or traces of animals are ever found around the enormous expanse of the bodies of the poor cows. Given the vast amount of animal victims claimed in that period, the state of Colorado requests the investigative intervention of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Thus, in 1979, after almost 4 years of waiting and after further damage caused to the farmers due to the exponential increase in these incidents, the FBI finally opened an investigation into this mysterious case. By now, not only is Colorado being hit by the mutilation epidemic, but it has spread throughout the American hinterland. And we are talking about a true epidemic, because a large part of the farms throughout the state fall victim to these mysterious deaths and mutilations. Despite the pressing interest from the media and local populations, little can be discovered about the strange dynamics of the livestock deaths, and the Federal Bureau is forced to close the case at the beginning of the 1980s, declaring that there is no connection to supernatural origins in the deaths of the livestock. These deaths would seem to be caused, in fact, by predators from those areas who would eat the carcasses of the cows. Citizens and sheriffs disagree on this last statement, declaring on several occasions that they can easily recognize the wounds caused by other predatory animals, and it seems that those terrible mutilations could not have been carried out by any wild animal. The case is, however, still archived, despite the fact that it is easy to find the various FBI reports which have been declassified and made public on the internet. In these reports, the Federal Bureau attempts to fully understand whether these incidents have any legal impediments regarding the Secret Service. Reference is made above all to Nebraska as the nerve center of these incidents, and attempts are made to investigate whether they are rituals of some cult, wild predators, or extraterrestrial beings. After various investigations by the Federal Bureau, it is questioned whether the FBI itself should deal with these cases, as the investigations would result in actions perpetrated by special forces without permission. The fact of denying them access to Colorado to investigate is discussed, despite the newspapers talking about the importance of the Federal Bureau as the institution that must intervene regarding these facts, given the size of the large-scale incidents. How is it possible that this is not taken into consideration and considered to be of public and national interest? In fact, it is declared that the jurisdiction of one state, that of Colorado in this specific case, is not sufficient, given that livestock mutilations have occurred in many other states of the USA. The full list of states includes Colorado, Pennsylvania, Kansas, Minnesota, Nebraska, Texas, Oklahoma, Montana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and California. The incidents are so widespread and so dangerous for public order that one cannot turn one's head the other way and pretend nothing happened. The American government needs to intervene, or at least try to shed light on these mysteries. To definitively complete the gravity of the situation, we then discover that the National Interagency Fire Center is forced to cancel rescue helicopter flights for fear that they may be shot down by farmers. In fact, in the meantime, while government organizations get lost in bureaucratic paperwork and in trying to understand where responsibility lies, citizens have rebelled, armed themselves, and are defending themselves against anything that may seem like a threat coming from the sky to attack their livestock. The farmers gather and organize night patrols. The skies are monitored, and many of these patrols, organized by the population, surround the farms to protect them. As if this wasn't enough, the farmers, together with some associations and a bank, spread the news of a cash reward of a bounty of $1,300 for anyone who manages to obtain detailed information or who manages to capture the culprits of these brutal murders. It will take quite some time before the panic and terror that is gripping the farms involved can be completely quelled. And who can blame them? These people are losing everything they have, namely the livestock that provides them with food and a living. However, the intended victims of these mutilations are not just cows, but throughout history there are various reported cases also involving sheep, horses, rabbits, deer, bison, and elk, all found dead and violently mutilated, without jaws, eyes, ears, tongue, lymph nodes, and genitals. It is only a matter of time before we begin to know more and see more clearly about these strange cases. In fact, years later, there will also be actual witnesses of these mutilations. In the 1990s, in Vancouver, Canada, many farms reported that large numbers of their livestock were attacked and disfigured by mysterious assailants. Many witnesses also claimed to hear strange noises coming from the sky, such as humming, and many other farmers claimed to have even seen, in the minutes before and after the incidents, strange humanoid-looking figures with unknown tools in their hands. It is curious and not to be underestimated how these events are always exponential. We start from stories and findings and then even get to real direct testimonies that reconstruct the facts as they happened. If we think that these incidents are confined to places and periods that no longer belong to us, we couldn't make a greater mistake. Because in 2012, in Wales, UK, many similar cases of horribly mutilated livestock are reported in large numbers, exactly like the great epidemic of the 1970s. The terror also returns, after many years, to its origins, its starting point in Colorado. In 2019, 5 purebred bulls were found dead, bled to death, and with various body parts that had been removed. Whoever or whatever is the creator of these events seems to never stop and to be something that transcends time and space, as if the purpose to be achieved with these actions is bigger, more important, and deeper. A cause of greater importance, something to do with the gathering of knowledge or the need for survival. Decades pass and discussions about strange mutilations cause a back and forth of opinions between skeptics and conspiracy theorists, private and government investigators. Around the 1980s, attempts were made to archive the cases as acts carried out by mysterious cults belonging to the satanic sphere, despite the fact that the basis for such suppositions is the same as those who believe that they may have been caused by beings that are not from this planet. Many of the farmers who are victims of these incidents cannot help but observe that most of the findings coincide with various sightings of strange flying objects. Furthermore, many of these farmers are firmly convinced that these mutilations have scientific objectives of some sort. The study of the Earth by extraterrestrial life forms, the testing of some extremely advanced tools of torture, or just simple experiments on living beings on Earth. Whatever the answer, to date no one can understand how these cases of mass mutilation can occur so regularly over the years and in such different areas of the globe, nor what the purpose of such crimes on living beings on planet Earth could be. Even after having reconstructed and re-elaborated the data, carefully observed and restudied in the light of new disconcerting events, those seeking the truth are not allowed to stop and settle on the absolute solution they have now found and attempted to confirm up until the last moment. There are some final considerations to make in every human and extra-human study. The literature regarding extraterrestrial events is so vast that one can get lost in it. While on the one hand, you can find infinite volumes and writings on various sightings, abductions, and close encounters, it is much more difficult to track down those events that psychically recur on our planet. But perhaps we are not giving them the right importance, and we are not trying to understand them fully. If some form of life has actually reached us and has the possibility of interacting with us, we should start to ask ourselves why many of the things that are done to us and to our planet occur. If these life forms are so advanced that they can navigate in distant space until they reach our blue-green planet, it is possible that they are also so intelligent that they want to operate and get their hands on the contents of the Earth in order to study and understand them in depth. If we really want to understand what the purposes of these experiments are, these surgical operations on humans and animals, the only measurement available to us is to try to understand why we do it too. Our race continues to carry out endless experiments on our planet to try to discover its secrets and tame its science, and most of the time they are invasive maneuvers that decisively affect what are various forms of life, at the limit of being able to control life itself. Science is a large cup that must be emptied and filled with new and old liquids, with other solid materials, with suppositions and observations. If this is what human beings have been doing since the dawn of time on the planet they live on, and for a few decades also on the other planets of the solar system, it could be possible that other life forms from other celestial bodies also have the same purpose and the same intentions. This is the first layer, the basis on which we can begin to ask ourselves the most disparate questions to get to the bottom of our experiments. Once we have validated our thesis with the various calculations, intellectual thoughts, and our observations, what we must then do is to look for any type of antitheses to disprove our hypotheses. Only in this way could we move forward in our research and complete our experiment. Once the data obtained has refuted or confirmed our experimentation, we will know which direction to go, which path to take, and continue in that direction. But we must not simply think that our theories are founded a priori and can have real confirmation on the exclusive basis of our thinking. We need evidence to validate, denials, counter-theses and antitheses in order to be able to look forward. We know that several unknown life forms have passed through our atmosphere and that several humans have even encountered them, but we continue to know or theorize very little about them. For this reason, we are the mice inside the glass case, and we do not know when the people who are studying or observing us will reveal themselves to us and allow us to understand the will of their plans. All we can try to do is to investigate and discover what is not revealed to us by the naked eye. The fire that Prometheus stole from the gods has a big price to pay, but that story doesn't end with the eternal punishment of the Titan Prometheus. No, that story ends with a rescue. After endless centuries in which Prometheus suffered his punishment, one day the mighty Hercules, the strongest being on planet Earth, showed up at the top of his mountain. The man-god asked the helpless Titan if he knew the way, and Prometheus replied not only by pointing him in the right direction, but also warning him of the dangers he would encounter later on his journey. Full of gratitude, Hercules decided to bless the Good Samaritan. So he took up his bow and shot an arrow at the eagle that had tortured Prometheus for eternity, and pierced it through and through, killing it. Then, with the strength of his own hands, he broke the chains that held the Titan prisoner, freeing him from the slavery of his torture. Prometheus was infinitely grateful to Hercules for having finally set him free. But, unlike what one might expect from the man who stole fire from the gods, Prometheus returned to Olympus and presented himself in front of Zeus, who initially did not welcome his return kindly. But the Titan had, however, learned a very important lesson and accepted the authority of the god of gods, bowing to his will, therefore accepting what Zeus had decided for both the gods and man. Although the price is infinitely large, what surrounds us, inside and outside our planet, contains the answers to the questions we ask ourselves. If someone is collecting samples and information on our planet, they are doing so with the same drive and will that moves those who investigate and try to shed light on the great unsolved mysteries of the universe. The true secret of science, the true formula that allows discoveries to come to light every time in a more explosive way, is the ability of scholars, of investigators, to move forward, to never stop in front of the infinite mystery at the borders of the universe.